right, here we go. Hi, welcome to the Unify webinar on stored procedures from Unify NXJ. This is your host, Matt Brunquell, and I also have with me here today Kevin McCormick, who will be doing the presentation. And Kevin has actually been with Unify for over 15 years, so it's great to have him as a resource here presenting on this topic. He is our lead trainer as well as a senior technical account manager for many of our accounts, and particularly with NXJ has done a lot of work with our lead accounts as well as the training. In fact, he just came back from a project in Brazil for a few weeks here, where he was doing some NXJ work with one of our partners and large end users. So you may hear a little bit of a cough. It has nothing to do with the dry topic today on stored procedures. And other than that, prior to Unify, Kevin worked at Lockheed as a system administrator, so he has that end-user background as well, in addition to just understanding the requirements, both from a training, consulting, and supporting standpoint. Now, before we get started, I'd like to just do a few housekeeping things. One is please feel free to ask questions, and the way that you do that is with your WebEx toolbar. There's a button at the bottom with a question mark, and use that. That's the Q&A panel, and we'll see that question. There's also the chat panel, but we ask that you just do the Q&A so we have one area to look at for the questions, just to make sure that we get to them all. And we'll have a Q&A session at the end, as you'll see on the agenda here, to go through any of the questions you asked during the course of the presentation. Now, for those of you that might be new to Unify, just to give you some background, we're a publicly traded software company that's been in business for 25 years, and we were the first to deliver a relational database in the Unix environment. And since then, we've been delivering development software products that run across different databases and platforms, really geared towards building and modernizing business applications. And they're really geared towards the business application developers, those that are trying to get business applications out there for their end users, where productivity is key and the result is key, as opposed to trying to do a lot of low-level coding. And today, Unify continues to focus on those types of solutions and those types of developers, and really enabling service-oriented architecture for organizations trying to modernize their existing applications moving forward. Now, with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Kevin to start the presentation on stored procedures.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt. And yeah, a little bit of a cold going on here, so I will try and reduce the number of coughs throughout the presentation here. This would sort of be a drinking game for some people. So, try and make this a little more entertaining for stored procedures, the topic. So what we want to talk about today, and for some this is actually an important topic, we want to talk about what stored procedures are first, just to get everyone on the same level, or the same playing field, and then go and talk about how you can call those from within inside NXJ. So most people would consider stored procedures basically a group of SQL statements that form some logical unit of work, some task, and encapsulate some operations or database queries, updates, deletes into a single atomic unit, and those execute on the database server. And you care about this for a couple of reasons. One is that, as I just mentioned, this encapsulates your business logic or your data access. So if you have to change your logic, you just change it in one place, and that's over on the database server. And security, if you use the stored procedure as the access layer to get to your data, then you can control who can call that stored procedure without having to go to each individual table, for example, and set access levels there. And then there's certainly the performance aspect of stored procedures. So by having the operations happen on the database server itself, there's no network traffic. The client of the stored procedure just makes a call to the procedure as a function, let the database do its work where it's highly efficient as that, and then just return the results back. No need to process through extra data and throw away ones that you don't need on the client side. Just get what you want and process it. So on the last bullet here, is just saying that the stored procedure is efficient also because it's been compiled and likely cached on the server. So if it's a stored procedure that's called frequently, the function to execute is already in memory and cached, and the result set, some of the data may be as well. So that makes it more efficient and faster, and we always care about performance. So then we want to now transition sort of into how the NXJ calls stored procedures. And for those of you that have seen NXJ in some of our other webinars, or have used our download evaluation version, or have it in your production environment, you've seen NXJ is all about making it easier to do things in the Java environment. So with NXJ, you'll see we have this EXEC syntax to call stored procedures and work with a variety of them. So as we say in the top part here, if your database supports calling stored procedures through the JDBC driver, NXJ can call them, whether that's the common users of stored procedures, so Oracle, Microsoft SQL Server, Unify's own SQL-based database, our own data server, MySQL, all the standard database vendors have stored procedure abilities, and NXJ can call them. And finally, at the bottom bullet there, if there's some reason the syntax doesn't quite match with our EXEC, you can always go to the straight JDBC routes for calling a stored procedure. Recall that NXJ adds on top of Java, doesn't remove any of the abilities of calling straight Java syntax. So what NXJ provides an easy syntax to do for the stored procedures is identify input parameters to the procedure, retrieve the output parameters, the values being returned. If it's a stored function like in Oracle where the procedure or function itself has a return value, we allow easy handling of that. And if your stored procedure returns multiple rows, so a result set, we allow the easy mechanism of scrolling through that as well. And all this is done using bind variables for the input-output parameters and potentially array data sets that are being returned. Top number 1. Okay, EXEC syntax. So this slide is really meant to just give an overview, and we'll drill down into more detailed examples of how you call stored procedures from within NXJ. And in bold, you'll see is the basic syntax, exec SQL call. And on the next slide, we'll see the syntax overview. What we'll see throughout the next few slides in the examples is how we work with input and output parameters and in-out parameters, since most stored procedure languages on databases support this concept of pass-in or pass-in and pass-out values. And we'll also see how cursors are manipulated for scrolling through the result sets. I mentioned that we can call stored functions, so there's a returning clause to get the return value back from the function. And just like with our other NXJ syntax, the into statement is used to get the values being returned when you're scrolling through a result set of data, so multiple rows being returned. And also similar to the exec for regular database operations, there's an executing loop to process each row. You'll see also that there's an additional statement called an ITERATE statement for working with result sets that return arrays. So the basic syntax taken from one of our manuals, in bold is the minimum requirements for an EXEC call statement for stored procedures. So basically, just the function name and the arguments that it needs. The rest are various variations on a theme that we'll see throughout the next few examples here. So how we're going to start this, the examples, and I believe we have 3 of them, is to look at the Oracle stored procedure first. So we're going to focus on Oracle since that tends to be where a lot of our customers are using stored procedures. So this procedure, get employee details, takes in one parameter, an employee ID, and returns 4 other pieces of data: first name, last name, salary, and the hire date, the start date of the employee. And that encapsulates a query that the user that's being executed, just selecting that information from the employee table for the matching passed-in employee. We won't delve any more into the syntax-specific parts of an Oracle stored procedure, but want to give you a flavor for what we were going to call. So to call this procedure, the syntax is pretty easy. EXEC call. In this case, we have a schema package, the employee package, and then the procedure name. and then we have the parameters being passed to it. You notice the first one is a hard-coded number. Normally you wouldn't do that, but we're just showing here that this is only an input parameter, so it can be a static value. The others, because they're output parameters, of course, have to be able to receive values. So the first name, last name, salary, and start date. So that's the most simple syntax of calling a stored procedure. Now, I know some of our other products, there's specific syntax for different database vendors, Microsoft versus Oracle. Not so with NXJ, because we're going through the JDBC layer, we can standardize on the syntax. Okay, so let's take the case where we're returning a cursor. So we're getting multiple records here. So this is the syntax in Oracle for a function called stored procedure get stocks. It takes in a price number, which is a maximum price. We're trying to find stocks below a certain price. And this returns a cursor object, and this is returning the stock symbol, the RIC, the price, and then when it was last updated from a stock prices table. And so this has the potential to return multiple rows. So we want to be able to call it and process each one of those at a time. So we're going to see two variations for doing that. So the first is using the regular executing loop and calling it directly. What you'll see is that we have exec_SQL call, same syntax of the package, the schema, and in this case there's no package name, takes in the stock price, and instead of having parameters on the values being returned in the parameter list, these are returned separately using the into syntax into these three temporary variables. And then for each record returned, we're going to use the regular NXJ executing loop for going through the result set. In this case, we're just going to do the NXJ mechanism for presenting data to a user by doing a clear to add operation, setting the value, and then saving the record into the repeating area that's being shown to the user into the selected set of records. So a different syntax that uses the iterator object, the iterate statement, is that we first create a result set object. We set up to call the store procedure by doing the exec_SQL call, but instead of immediately processing it, we use the returning statement into the RS result set variable. In this case, we're going to, further down, go ahead and use the exec_SQL iterate statement against that RS object, the result set, and then it's basically the same syntax into these three variables. In this case, there are probably fields on the form. We're going to update them and then do a new record. So this is a way to take data from the stored procedure, present it to the user in a very easy fashion for them to navigate through. Now, sometimes there are more complex stored procedures that return array objects or other more complex data. So in that case, we need to do a dynamic stored procedure syntax. For example, in Oracle, and that's what we'll use as an example again, if you use an index by table to return an array of data, you have to use this syntax. It's a little more complex, but not too bad at all. And just as a side note for Oracle, because Oracle requires you to use their OCI interface for doing this kind of work. So you use a different JDBC syntax for calling it. So in this case, we'll see using the exec_SQL prepare statement, and then we'll also see the execute statement as well with the returning clause. Excuse me. So let's go look at the Oracle procedure again, as we've done with the other ones. In this case, it's a procedure that just has three output parameters, but you'll notice that they're labeled TBL. These are tables of data. These are arrays of data. So this is a query just selecting employee ID, first name, last name from our employee table, but it's getting set through this loop here for each record. So it's basically populating the three arrays that are going to return the data. We're not including the definition of the table type there. That's another Oracle-specific syntax. So let's go through calling this guy. So the syntax is a little bit more work. You have to do an NXJ prepared call first. Then you say, using the exec_SQL, and we're going to do a using connection clause here, so that because we're using this other Oracle connection, do a prepared call, and into this call variable, We then need to work with the parameters and determine what type they are so we can make sure we're assigning them to the right variables inside the NXJ code. So we get a list of the get output parameter data, which is available off of our prepared call object. So it returns an array of parameters. And for each of those, we're going to go ahead and set up an NXJ parameter variable so we can inspect them, and then we're going to see what data type it is. If it's an index by table, in this case this is Oracle specific, with an index by table, we're going to go ahead and register what our expected return count is. In this case, we're assuming 1,000 rows. You're not held to that, but that optimizes the amount of data that's being returned and how it's handled in memory. So we have prepared the statement, gotten the parameters, registered the parameters, and then now we need to set up the results to get the array data back. So we're going to create 3 Java arrays, so an integer array for the employee ID and then 2 string arrays for the first name and last name. So the next thing we do is we do a exec.sql execute of that call statement, getting the returning value back. So you'll see we use the same syntax repeatedly here, to get the first array, second array, and third array, and then we're going to just take that data and go ahead and show it to the user. And this is just looping through the arrays, using a for loop in the first one as our number of records, and they should be the same, and do clear to add, set the value on the form, and go ahead and update the record. And don't forget at the end to close the call. I didn't highlight that one, but that was the very bottom part there. So this is a fairly short webinar today, so we really only have just one more slide here. In some stored procedure languages, you have this concept of global variables with inside packages. So for example, Oracle has those, and NXJ makes it easy to set and get those. So we have an exec.sql syntax, oops, back to the slide here, exec.sql set var, and what the variable name is a string, and then what value to set it to. And again, it's the same way, just with get var instead. So that is about the short and sweet part of calling stored procedures from within inside NXJ. Very easy to do, consistent syntax, and for a lot of our larger customers, this is widely used because they have different clients accessing different amounts of data from different places, and they centralize their logic. And so they require the NXJ application called stored procedure to perform operations.
Oh, great, Kevin. Thanks a lot. What we're going to do now is open it up for the Q&A. And we have a few questions here that have come across. But what we'll do is just go silent for like 30 seconds, and then we'll come back on and start going through the questions, just to give you folks a second if there's any last-minute posts that need to be done. And we will see you shortly and start going through the questions. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and start going through the questions. So the first one we have is, how much coding is saved from that exec SQL syntax that you're using in NXJ?
Good question. So the easiest answer is to show you an example. We'll go over to NXJ, and we'll take the first example that we talked about, the very quick and easy get employee detail function. So if we look inside NXJ over in the development environment, we'll see we have a call to it, same way we saw in the slide. Now this is the NXJ code that you do to call it. If we go look at the compiled code, what ends up being done in Java, we'll see, we'll expand this out in my editor using a large font here, you'll see it's a bit more work to do here. we have to get the session object and the database connection and make a prepared call, and then prepare the statement, passing in various parameters you have to know the details on, then register all the parameters and everything, and then finally execute it. So you'll see from 2 lines of code, it ends up being a 5-fold or so kind of return on investment. And with the larger statements, it gets even better because there's less work to do, but more complexity being removed from you.
Yeah, I can see too on that. You make that return on investment comment, Kevin. That I mean, besides the time saving, just also I would think the QA saving, because there's just less lines of code, chances for errors and mistakes and things like that.
Absolutely. Things you might not catch till way downstream, and debugging those later becomes much more expensive.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So next question: What database transactions do the stored procedures run under?
That's a very good question. So with NXJ, based on the connections that you have in your project, we always have a transaction open to those in each end user's running session of the application. So if you call a stored procedure from within inside code, that runs inside that user's transaction. So if it's doing updates of records, select queries, it's only going to get from that transaction, which is the right way you want to do it. You want it to be encapsulated until a commit happens. And remember, though, that you can always use the exec SQL using syntax as well to use a different connection, but still the same managed connection for that user's session.
Great. All right. Now the next question, this is the last one we have right now, so if there's any other ones, please get them in, but if not, after this one, we'll just wrap up the webinar and bring it to a close. So the third question, can the stored procedure calls be combined with the SOA capabilities of NXJ?
Another good question. Absolutely. So for those that may not have seen our SOA webinar on NXJ, which you can go to the website and download too at your leisure, is that we implement web services by what we call a business service, which is really a Java class with the ability, I'll go to the property panel, of being exposed as a web service. So we can say publish as web service. And what this is you can create any regular Java classes in here. And inside here, you can do the exec SQL call statement the same way you do it in the form code. So absolutely. And then because the web services run within the context of the same transaction model, going back to the previous question, they have their own transaction that will handle the database operations.
So kind of what you're showing here is that if you're using the web service capability of NXJ to publish a service, you can make those stored procedure calls in those services you're creating? Is that what this is?
Absolutely. That's exactly right. You don't have to revert back to straight JDBC calls for stored procedure operations.
Got it. Got it. Okay, great. All right, well, I don't see any other questions, so I think what we'll do is go ahead and wrap this up. First of all, Kevin and I want to thank you for participating today. We hope you found the content valuable. And we will be making this available on our website as a recorded event. Should be available by the end of this week. And as Kevin had mentioned, there's also the previous NXJ webinars, recorded versions available as well if you want to see some of the other topics that we do. So we do try and do a new topic every month, although next month we are taking a break because of the summer holidays, but we'll be starting it back up in September. Now, the other thing, so please, if there's particular topics on NXJ you want to hear, let us know. The other thing you should know is that our DevCon, or developer conferences, are coming up here in the fall. There's 2 in Europe, one in Munich, or München for you Germans from the Bavaria area, and that's going to be in mid to late October. And there's also one, I believe, in Norway. It's one of the Scandinavian states up there, and I want to say it's Norway or Sweden. Anyway, you'll be seeing the announcement on it shortly, again in October. And then the one in North America will be in November, the second week of November, and I believe that it's going to be, it's the week of November 10th, and I want to say it's either the 11th and 12th or 12th and 13th, but November's a great time to come to Northern California. It'll be in Sacramento at our corporate headquarters. So it's a great opportunity to meet with management, see what the latest product directions and corporate directions are, and actually meet the excellent technical resources that we have here that are driving these products, both from a development standpoint and a customer standpoint, folks like Kevin McCormick here. So keep that in mind, mark that on your calendars, and we hope to see you on the next webinar in September. Thank you.